Last time we spoke about your research, Doctor, with thousands of people regarding their experiences in past life regression. This time we're going to be talking about future life progression. I know that you have written extensively about the past life progressions, but you haven't written about your research that's ongoing about what we're going to look at in the future. Maybe you can set the stage for us. And what's it all about, the research that you're doing now?
I operate on the philosophical assumption that we plan the future in the present. Just as we plan to take a job in another city or move, we are changing our future. So this aspect of planning or pre-visioning the future goes on consciously as well as unconsciously. The idea of precognition of people somehow in the dream state, especially being able to know when something's going to happen in the future, the next few days, the next few months, is fairly well established in parapsychology research. Knowing that this is true, I said to myself, well, why don't I progress people? Why don't I find out what the world is going to be like? What is going on in the unconscious of man? What kind of future are we planning for ourselves? I also operate on the assumption that the future can always be changed, in that we can always say, no, I'm not going to take that job. So therefore, I approached it with the idea of tentativeness. I wanted to know what people were thinking now about the future, rather than saying this is going to be the future. What I discovered after I'd hypnotized about 1,400 subjects and given them the option of going to the years 2100 and 2300 and got very consistent results, I had to stop and rethink my research. I assumed that different people would plan different things about the future. Some would be optimists, some would be pessimists. I didn't find that. I found very, very consistent results in the future projection. They were of a disturbing nature, so I stopped the research for a while. I said, I'm not going to do this. I did go to the years 21 and 2300 so that people wouldn't be previsioning their death in this life. Mm-hmm. At least I'd move it that far into the future. And I began to research what there was in the literature in our culture about the millennium, the apocalypse, where these ideas began. And then I said to myself, well, maybe it's only Christians that have this very apocalyptic vision of the future. And I would go to other cultures. Presumably the Chinese, it's the year 5271, not the year 2000. And to my great surprise, discovered that in many of the primitive cultures, if we can call, say, the Hopi Indian a primitive culture, and in most of the world religions, there are prophecies of great change coming at about the year 2000, translated into their language. So this led me into further research. At the same time, I was continuing my group research in 2300, but I needed a lot more background. And what I discovered fascinated me so it led me into a whole other field, and that was that these predictions all seem related to the fact that the Earth is moving through a 25,000-year cycle as well as a one-year cycle, and that this great year progression means that all cultures who have any understanding of the sky or of astronomy would say that at about the year 2000, a new constellation appears in the sky just before sunrise on the day of the spring solstice. I'm defining it that precisely because that's precisely how it's defined. It's not an abstract occult thought. The dawning of the age of Aquarius is not something thought up by a Broadway songwriter. All cultures are aware that we're moving into a whole new phase of the great year, which occurs roughly every 2,145 years.
Is the appearance of that constellation scientifically verifiable?
Yes.
Are the astronomers?
Yes, the great year is now described as the Chandler Wobble in Western astronomy. And I discovered that in ancient Chinese astrology and in India astrology, predating the Mesopotamian astrology we know in this culture, they had a concept that the sun, with its accompanying planets, itself revolved around a much larger sun, which is Alcyon. Alcyon is a star that exists, according to Western astronomers, but these very ancient astrologers said that the period of revolution of the sun around Alcyon was 25,000 years. There's also an occult tradition that at halfway points in this great year, there are great earth changes and floods. They report in many cultures that the destruction of Atlantis, say, was roughly 12,000 years ago, or halfway from us in the great year, and that among the Polynesians, on the Chinese mainland, other Pacific peoples describe the sinking of Lemuria, or a Pacific kind of geological change, dating 25,000 years ago. So that in every half of the great year, there are great earth changes, pole shifts, that kind of apocalyptic happening in the midst of many people going back many thousands of years.
Okay. Now, specifically in your research, when you put these people under hypnosis into rapid eye movement, the dream state, they were able to, and you specifically directed them to the future, to a specific year, either 2100, 2300. What kinds of things, now we're talking about apocalypse, we're talking about great change, we're talking about flood, planetary change, the appearance of new constellation. What sorts of things in your research, what sorts of things did they say that would lead you to...
There are two bodies of evidence here. One is from my group research at 21 and 2300. The other is a group of individual subjects who are known predictors of the future, such as, say, Alan Vaughan, who wrote a book on it, and other psychics who volunteered to go to the immediate future, 1985, 1990, 1995.
Mm-hmm.
So I have these two bodies of information, one about the near future, one about the future 100 and 300 years from now. The group research shows that the Earth in 2100 is largely barren. Vegetation has disappeared from the Earth. People live in enclosed cities, transparent domes. The foodstuff they eat is some kind of an artificial one, which they describe as very bland. The population is 5% of what it is today in 2100. Life is also pursued in a space colony, not on another planet, and not on spaceships, but on an orbiting space colony, where apparently seeds have been brought to the colony, and there is some agriculture work, but it's very limited space. By 2300, population has doubled. That is, I get 10% of the current population reporting lives in 2300. The Earth has become green again. The Earth does regreen itself. By 2300, people are traveling throughout space. They're not limited to the orbiting space colony anymore. In both 2100 and 2300, I get no reports of war or conflict or disease or famine. Those remnants of the population functioning on Earth seem to have really transcended the problems that now face us and that we can't seem to solve. So while the population is much less and the Earth goes through a period of barrenness before it is restored, the human enterprise has greatly changed for the better.
Are the people who are living in 2300, in some instances, in this research in the dream state of the recollections of these people, the same people in some instances? In other words, has their lifespan increased to over 200 years?
No, but many of those who do report lives in the future past 2100 do report that death is a matter of choice. I don't get disease reported, as I do in past time periods, and they often decide to die. Life itself is considered as a journey or a trip. And apparently an understanding of consciousness and its role in the universe is widely understood, so that death does not have the same connotation that it has in our culture. So one can live to 120 and say, that's it, I'm off duty.
Okay. When you did the original research and you were trying to find out about past lives and past life regressions, you were able in many instances to go to the anthropologists, the archaeologists, the history books, newspapers, microfilms, that sort of thing. You had some kind of a running base on one side of the screen that you could put the information that was coming in on the right side against. Right. When you do this kind of future progression with people, you don't have a history book that you can look at. You don't
of course, you can't research the future till it arrives.
Yeah, you can't really do that. So,
that obviously, it's sort of neat too, because that way you don't have to believe what the subjects say. So I decided to run these short-term future trips with the so-called psychic people. Again, I hypnotize them to see whether I could get predictions that would occur in a reasonable period of time, like a year, to see whether or not they were accurate. One of the things that struck me, just in people's reports, informal reports of dreams predicting the future, is the extensive dreaming of water and tidal waves. In a society here in San Francisco, especially, where everybody talks about the big quake that's coming, I do not get a big quake in the future. I get lots of little ones. But California doesn't fall into the sea by a big quake. Instead, the sea seems to fall into California. As I can best
I would
put
say
it.
with recent developments in the state
Yes.
of logical, likely possibility.
Yes, but this occurred 4 and 5 years ago, before the rains began, really 2 years ago. And they didn't become severe in terms of heavy snowmelt until this year. So these really predated the current conditions. One of the things that I found in the ancient legends or myths about what's going to happen with this dawning of the age of Aquarius is that the molten core of Earth is pulled by certain planetary or celestial forces that are especially strong at these periods of shift in a great year, and that when the molten core of Earth responds to these planetary tidal pulls, there is an increase in volcanic activity, because the molten core of Earth is sort of popping up in places where normally it's quiescent. And this, I think, is possibly the reason for that El Nino phenomenon, or the heated Pacific Ocean, because along the rift in the ocean, lava flows continuously. The Hawaiian Islands are just sort of an extreme example of that. And it may also be that there is a magnetic pole shift going on now. Not so much mechanically that the axis of Earth is shifting, but magnetic north has been more distant from true north in the last few years than it has in any of our recorded knowledge of it. And samples paleontology uses show that magnetic pole shifts have occurred at least 10 times in the history of Earth. So we may be going through a magnetic pole shift which is agitating the molten core of Earth, much as water is affected by moon pull. So the molten core can be affected by certain celestial angles as we travel through the universe, as we travel around Alcyon, perhaps. And that the natural consequences of this is a melting of the ice in the polar regions. I got that from a subject about 5 years ago. And I noticed on CBS television a report of glaciers just sort of booming down, collapsing and melting. This raises the sea levels, especially in the northern hemisphere. The heated ocean causes many more storms, which causes a change in rainfall distribution. All this is happening now. It makes me feel queasy. I don't like Las Vegas underwater. It's not supposed to be.
Where can we go with this? Again, you said one of the nice things about not having any kind of a checklist, a historical checklist to either verify the future, is that you don't have to believe it if you don't want to. I mean, it's just there, and it's very interesting. Where do you want to go with this information when you get your results together and you compile it? Would you want to take it to the scientific community, the political community, the religious community, the masses? Is there a practical application for future life progression?
Well, this is what scares me, and this is why I haven't talked about it before. This program's really the first time I've ever publicly talked about it. I don't know. One of my feelings is that this culture has reached sort of a dead end in its notion of how to organize itself for the future. That people feel a kind of block when you talk about the future. I am myself, each one of us are all appalled at different things that are happening. My feeling of being appalled is the way the children are being neglected in this society. I can't see how any society can survive when no one is taking care of the kids. And we see that there's double the amount of chronic illness and birth defects in children that there was 25 years ago. This was a recent study reported. Suicide rates among teenagers are much more than double what they were even 10 years ago. This feeling of hopelessness is linked in many of our eyes to the possibility of nuclear war, but I think it's more than that. I think we are ready for profound changes. I think we're ready for new challenges. I think we're going to get those new challenges in terms of adapting to geological shifts. I was amused to note that the fish and the crustaceans the fish feed on have all neatly moved up north as the ocean warmed. They can adapt very easily, whereas the millionaires in Malibu are having a terrible time adapting to the loss of their seafront. I also noticed in Coalinga that a 5-year-old was interviewed on TV, and he said, I want to move to Bakersfield. The mother was interviewed, and she said, well, my husband has a job in Coalinga, and we have the mortgage to take care of. And I thought, gee, they're a lot better off if they listen to the 5-year-old. I'd get out of Coalinga. So I think all of us need to be much more flexible in our notions of what's important in life and how it's possible to build a new society and to build new lives, even though the ground may disappear underneath us and become water. We can always move, like the fish.
You strike me as an individual who's having a lot of fun doing what you're doing. You seem real upbeat, up-tempo. In the previous program, you told me that you were clinically dead a couple of times on the operating table, and you've obviously had near-death or post-death experiences, depending on your perspective. Do you feel... Are you driven right now to pursue this research? Is there something that you have to contribute before you move on to your next stage?
I guess so, but I wouldn't call it driven. That implies anxiousness and pain. One thing about dying and coming back is that you don't give much of a darn anymore. The things that formerly were of great importance become much less important. I spend most of my time with a dog and a cat and children and some flowers. I find that much more soothing. Driving in here to Embarcadero Center 1 is real depressing to me. So I am upbeat because life is upbeat, because spirit is upbeat, because death is a release and not a punishment. To me, I have no fear of the unknown. I only feel happy about it, and I feel happy about new challenges. But speaking of my own personal dynamics, my biggest problem has always been being bored. And I'm not bored doing this work.
What kind of a reaction are you getting from let's separate them if we can, even though they're part of the same community, the scientific community in terms of the physicists, the chemists, those sorts of people? Have you discussed the research that you're doing now with
they
people?
Discover my research through reading my books and write to me. I have, especially when I began, discussed it with scientists, Bell Laboratories, and NASA, University of California, Berkeley. I don't bother much about that. There used to be a scientific attitude that stems from Victorian days. There was a steady march up from the amoeba to the Victorian gentleman scientist, and there were no unusual occurrences in the course of that steady evolution, that all facts were known by Western male white authority figures, and that any truth espoused by blacks, women, powerless types, what were called primitives, were all described as myths and superstitions. Now, of course, the position of the Victorian gentleman is considerably shakier. The intense belief that we now have all the answers and any answers before us were sheer nonsense is fading away. I don't sweat it.
What about the psychologists? Have you exchanged ideas with some practicing clinical psychologists now that are doing the kind of work that you started out doing when you first got into this whole daily work?
Yes. I even helped found an organization, the Association for Past Life Research and Therapy, which is for professionals in the helping field. And they are doing quite well in terms of membership, and they organize conferences in which how-to hands-on methods of using these hypnotic techniques, of using past life recall as a therapy device. I see considerable movement in the so-called third force psychologists or humanistic psychologists.
Are those humanistic psychologists also doing the future life progressions?
No, I don't recommend it to any of them. I do have two other psychologists who have worked verifying my results with their own experimentation on the past life regressions. Incidentally, this experiment is repeatable and does result in the same findings. And two of them are working on collecting data on future lives in other parts of the country so that I compare those findings with mine.
You said when we started that if you're thinking about taking a job in another city, you kind of make plans for it, or if you're thinking about any kind of a change in your life, you sort of plan ahead. And sometimes the planning results in changes from your original plans. You modify the plans as you go. You decide not to locate in Coalinga, but to locate in Bakersfield instead, and that sort of thing. Does your research now, this future life progression research, have application for people that hear about it? Is there something that we can do to affect changes of someone that, I don't like the idea of living in a plastic bubble. I want to find a way to get around that.
Well, you'll be out of here long before then, Barry.
Well, when I come back, I'll be back 2 or 3 times by then.
Oh, you intend to pop up here all the time, right?
Yeah,
You like
sure.
it here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say that our unconscious often arranges these things more than our conscious mind does. These coincidences that we run into a friend who tells us about a job. I would say that if anybody is living in the Bay Area or the Central Valley or Southern California and something happens that might make it easier for them to, say, move to Arizona or Northern California or the Sierras, I would go with that happening. I wouldn't hang around here like the people in Malibu were hanging on, when it's obvious the next storm is going to do even more damage. I think we're going to have much heavier rains. I don't think this is a temporary glitch meteorologically. It's worldwide. Siberia is 20 degrees warmer than it ever was before. There is some kind of change going on in the climate, a long-term change. And we better just gently adapt to it and not try to, we're going to rebuild.
Let's talk about, for a second, one of my favorite topics, free will, destiny versus free will. In the future life progressions, it seems to me that that's a question that would come into play real often.
All right, there are certain things that all of us, when we decide to play the game of being alive on Earth, certain rules and regulations of being here. You can't regrow a leg if it's amputated.
Well, you can't today, but maybe in 2300
maybe in 20
you can.
years.
Oh,
Yeah, we might change that rule. Okay. But right now we're stuck with certain rules when we're here. And one of them is that you can't really change big climate changes by getting your insurance policy up to date or whatever. There are certain things we have to adapt to. If there's a cholera epidemic and we happen to have a life there, we'll get knocked off by it, whether we plan to or not. So there are limitations to free will once you are in a body in this life. However, each of us can maneuver within these changes. For example, World War II. There were many people, I think, who knew the war was coming. It wasn't a surprise. Some of them got out of Europe. Some of them saved themselves. Others of them did not. Was there some kind of unconscious need? I've had people regress to being Jews killed in concentration camps. Not many. I don't have many, but I do have some. And in asking them after their death in the concentration camp, after they'd floated above their bodies, did you have a purpose in that life? They said, yes, it was to be an example. It was to be part of this Holocaust, to serve as a symbol to others about war. So many of us can be involved in certain catastrophes. But at a spirit level, we may have decided to do so. For instance, a Jew in Germany who got to New York by 1939, if I hypnotized them, they said, no, I wasn't going to be part of the Holocaust. That wasn't part of my personal plan. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that the experiences we have in life sometimes are part just of being in the rules and regulations, like cholera epidemic. But many important things are decided upon before we're born.
What do you think the world would be like if the mystery of death was solved and if people had a sense of eternity or continuity?
Well, I think there are quite a few people in the world today who do have the problem of death solved, who do have a sense of continuity. The notion that all of us are helplessly striving for an answer is probably not true. Quite a few spiritual groups right in this country, quite a few people all around the world who have, in that sense, transcended this fear of death.
Still probably a minority, though.
Yeah,
Would you agree
I'm
with
afraid
that?
they are a minority. Okay. Yeah. I think that looking at the behavior of people who have themselves solved the problem tells you a lot about what will happen when the majority does. These are peaceable people. These are not people who conduct war games. They are not people who make killings on the stock market. They are not people who care much about material things. And I think you will find the world is much less interested in material things after these transitions and understandings have occurred.
Where is this information that you're tapping into recorded? It's in our minds, it's in our subconscious. Can we is where a dumb question? Maybe that's
no, it's what I've often thought myself. Where are these people getting these things? Why do they agree on the same thing, such as the type of utensil used in 2100? How can they all come up with the same one? And of course, I kind of use Jung's notion of the collective unconscious. But I basically believe that all of the people who are alive today form a kind of group consciousness. You might call it world consciousness. And that every night we not only dream our personal dreams, which we tend to remember, but I think we have collective dreams. Kind of like the whole world dreams together something. The old philosophical question, are we just a part of a wart on an old lady's nose in some giant universe? Well, are we all part of an overall consciousness? And in that sense, we are all linked. And the separate individuality we have is just because we can't look under the water and see the linkage. We only see the separate islands that are our personal selves.
Is there anything we can do on the conscious level to help facilitate that, the general subconscious, the link that binds?
Yes. Pet animals. Listen to children. Enjoy the sun when it's out. A general, peaceable search for meaning in the simple things is probably more useful to man than any formation of committees or protest demonstrations. This is what changing consciousness means, to become gentler, to become more universal, to become less involved in our own little ego needs for the immediate future.